Whispers of Shadow presents the BBC recording nobody was ever meant to see. Written and narrated by Gregory Sparrow. Prologue. The BBC has officially denied that this recording ever existed. According to every public record, the tape was destroyed in 1975. Yet 3 copies survived. One was locked inside a restricted archive. One disappeared. And the 3rd may still exist somewhere today. Before we begin, there is something you should know. The voice on this recording belongs to a man who was not born until 17 years after it was recorded. That statement should be impossible. The documents you're about to hear should not exist. The investigation should never have happened. And the recording itself should have remained buried forever. Yet here we are. My name is Edward Harrow. Everything I'm about to tell you comes from internal BBC documents, archived witness statements, recovered transcripts, and one surviving duplicate of a recording known only as Archive 17, a recording that frightened experienced journalists, a recording that caused senior BBC staff to resign, a recording connected to disappearances spanning more than 40 years, and a recording containing a warning that may never have been intended for us. The story begins in London, October 1974. A gray afternoon, cold rain, low clouds hanging over the city like a heavy blanket. At 11:43 a.m., a package arrived at Broadcasting House. The envelope was ordinary. Brown paper, no return address, no postage marks, no identifying information of any kind. Only a handwritten note attached to the front. 4 words. Do not broadcast this. The package was delivered to a junior producer named Richard Mallory, 32 years old, married, respected, reliable. The type of employee nobody ever noticed because nothing unusual ever happened around him. If someone had asked his colleagues to describe Richard, they would have called him boring, dependable, predictable, the last person anyone expected to become involved in a mystery. At approximately 12:15 p.m., Richard signed for the package. At 12:32 p.m., he entered a private listening booth carrying a cassette player and the tape. At 1:14 p.m., he emerged. Witnesses later described him as pale, confused, visibly shaken. One colleague reported that Richard immediately asked what day it was. Another claimed he'd checked his watch 6 times in less than a minute. A third remembered Richard staring through a window for nearly 10 minutes without speaking. At first, everyone assumed it was a joke. Perhaps the tape contained something disturbing, a threat, a confession, an elaborate prank. The BBC received strange material every week. Most of it was forgotten within hours. This tape should have been forgotten too. Instead, Richard locked it inside his office, restricted access, requested an immediate review, and filed an internal report demanding that senior management examine the recording as soon as possible. Nobody knows exactly what he wrote. The report disappeared sometime before 1976. Only references to it survived. 3 days later, Richard resigned. No explanation, no farewell party, no goodbye speech, nothing. He simply packed his belongings and left Broadcasting House forever. 2 weeks after that, he vanished. His car was discovered near the White Cliffs of Dover. The vehicle was locked. His wallet remained inside. His watch sat neatly on the dashboard. The keys were still in the ignition. Richard himself was never found. No body, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play, no explanation. Officially, the disappearance had nothing to do with the tape. Unofficially, the tape became one of the most restricted items in BBC history, at least according to the documents recovered decades later. For 6 months, the recording passed between departments. Engineers listened to it. Audio specialists analyzed it. Executives reviewed transcripts. Security personnel examined the cassette itself. Every investigation produced the same conclusion. The tape was authentic. No signs of editing. No evidence of manipulation. No hidden cuts. No technical trickery. The cassette was ordinary. The voice was real. And that was the problem, because the speaker identified himself repeatedly. His name was Daniel Mercer. According to the recording, he had been born in 1991, 17 years after the tape arrived. At first, investigators assumed it was a hoax. Naturally, what other explanation could there be? Yet, the more they examined the material, the more difficult that explanation became. The speaker described events that had not yet happened, technologies that did not yet exist, locations that had not yet been constructed. At first, these references seemed meaningless. Random guesses, coincidences. Then, time passed, and those predictions started coming true, one by one, slowly, relentlessly. The first confirmed match occurred in 1982, a transportation project mentioned on the tape. Then another in 1987. Then a political event in 1990. By the late 1990s, internal investigators were forced to admit something deeply unsettling. The voice possessed knowledge it should not have possessed, and the accuracy appeared to be increasing, not decreasing. That realization led to the formation of a special review committee. Most of the committee's records remained classified or missing. However, fragments survived. Fragments that revealed the fear spreading through the organization. One memo contained only a single sentence. If recording is authentic, timeline contamination may already have occurred. Nobody knew what that meant. Not officially. Yet the phrase appeared again and again and again. Timeline contamination. The words sounded absurd, like something from a science fiction novel. Yet experienced professionals continued using them. Whatever they believed was happening. They took it very seriously indeed. The first surviving transcript begins approximately 3 minutes into the recording. There is no introduction, no greeting, only a man's voice speaking calmly, almost casually, as though recording a routine report. The transcript reads, "If anyone is hearing this, then something has gone wrong." A pause. Several seconds of static. Then, "I don't know where this recording will end up. Maybe nowhere. Maybe years before it should. If you're hearing this in 1974, stop listening. None of this was meant for you." The investigators later underlined those words repeatedly. None of this was meant for you. The voice continued, "My name is Daniel Mercer. I was born in Manchester in 1991. If this recording has reached the past, then the breach is larger than we feared." The transcript ends there for several pages. Those missing pages have never been recovered. Nobody knows what was removed. Nobody knows who removed it. But what follows afterward may be even stranger. Because Daniel Mercer begins describing something called the drift, a phenomenon he claims is responsible for countless disappearances throughout human history. Not accidents, not crimes, not murders, disappearances, entire people, entire locations, entire events, simply removed, as if they had never existed at all. According to Mercer, reality was not fixed. It was merely stable, a temporary arrangement maintained by countless interconnected events. Most of the time, the system corrected itself automatically. Sometimes it failed. When it failed, people vanished, places vanished, histories changed, memories diverged, and occasionally someone noticed. The first engineer who reviewed these sections described them as deeply disturbing. Not because they were frightening, because they sounded logical. Mercer spoke like an engineer, a scientist, a technician explaining a malfunction. No dramatic language, no emotional manipulation, no theatrical performance. Only observations, only facts, only warnings. That detail would later become extremely important, because every person who listened to the complete recording reported the same thing. They believed him, not because they wanted to, because the voice sounded incapable of lying, and that terrified them far more than any ghost story ever could. To be continued. The investigation begins. The first official investigation into Archive 17 should have ended within days. Instead, it continued for years, not because investigators believed Daniel Mercer, at least not at first. It continued because The recording kept producing questions nobody could answer, questions that multiplied every time someone listened to it. By January of 1975, a special review group had been assembled inside the BBC. Its members included audio engineers, archivists, producers, and several outside consultants whose identities remain heavily redacted in every surviving document. Even today, entire pages are covered in black ink, names removed, departments removed, recommendations removed. Only fragments remain. Yet those fragments paint a disturbing picture. The committee did not spend most of its time analyzing the tape. They spent most of their time investigating the people who had listened to it, because something was happening to them, something measurable, something documented. The earliest symptoms seemed harmless: difficulty sleeping, headaches, mild memory problems, strange dreams. But over time, the reports became increasingly unusual. One producer claimed he remembered attending a university he had never attended. A secretary insisted she owned a dog despite never having had one. A sound engineer repeatedly described a train station that did not exist on any map. At first, these incidents were treated as stress reactions. The recording was strange. People were becoming obsessed. Naturally, they began imagining things. That explanation worked for several weeks. Then, reality became more complicated. The first major incident occurred on January 21st, 1975. A BBC engineer named Michael Turner submitted a formal report. The report survives. The paper is damaged. Parts of it are missing. But the most important section remains intact. It reads, "I have begun remembering events that never happened." I understand how that sounds. I am aware that this statement appears irrational. However, I am recording it because the memories contain details I cannot explain. Specific details, consistent details, details that can be independently verified. The report continues for 6 pages. Most concern ordinary experiences, conversations, locations, people. But one section drew the attention of investigators immediately. Michael claimed he remembered attending his sister's funeral. The problem was simple. His sister was alive, perfectly healthy, living in Birmingham. Investigators contacted her directly. She confirmed she was alive. The matter should have ended there, except for one detail. Michael accurately described a headstone that did not yet exist. A headstone containing a specific inscription. Several years later, after his sister died in a traffic accident, investigators quietly revisited the report. The inscription matched perfectly, word for word. Nobody could explain why. The report was classified. The investigation continued, and the recording remained locked inside a restricted archive. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer's voice continued speaking from the future. According to the transcripts, he seemed completely unaware of the chaos his message was causing. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He wasn't attempting to prove anything. He simply sounded desperate to document events before they disappeared. At one point, he states, "If this recording reaches the wrong year, then you already know the containment systems failed." A pause follows. Then, "I suppose that's obvious." The line appears almost humorous. Except nothing else about the recording is. Several minutes later, Mercer begins describing what he calls drift events. The BBC investigators spent months trying to determine exactly what he meant. The surviving transcript reads, "Most people never notice them." Reality corrects itself too quickly. A missing street, a missing building, a missing person. The system repairs the damage before anyone asks questions. Another pause, then, "But sometimes the correction fails. And when it does, people remember different histories." One committee member wrote a note beside this section, "Nonsense." Another later added, "Then why are the reports matching?" Nobody ever answered that question, because the reports were matching far too often, far too precisely. Employees who had never met each other were describing identical memories, identical locations, identical events, and most disturbing of all, identical dreams. The dream reports began appearing in February. Initially, only 2 individuals experienced them. Then 5, then 12. By spring, more than 20 listeners had described essentially the same nightmare. The dream always began the same way. A long corridor, no windows, dim lighting. A constant electrical hum. At the end of the corridor stood a door. Every witness described the same number painted across its surface. Nobody knew why. Nobody understood the significance. Yet the reports continued arriving, night after night, month after month. One archivist became so frightened that she refused to enter any room marked with the number 17. Her colleagues mocked her, until something happened, something that transformed Archive 17 from an internal curiosity into a serious security concern. It happened during a controlled listening session on February 17th, 1975. The date appears repeatedly throughout the surviving files. Several investigators later referred to it as the window incident. 8 people attended the session. 6 BBC employees, 2 external consultants. The recording began normally. Participants listened through headphones, taking notes, marking timestamps, comparing transcript accuracy. Everything proceeded according to plan. Then, approximately 43 minutes into playback, one participant suddenly removed his headphones. According to witness statements, he stood up so abruptly that his chair overturned. He pointed toward a studio window overlooking an internal courtyard. "What is that?" The question immediately drew everyone's attention. All 8 participants turned. All 8 later provided statements, and all 8 described exactly the same thing. A man standing alone in the rain, motionless, watching the building, watching them. Witnesses estimated he stood roughly 60 yards away. No umbrella, no movement, no visible reaction to the weather, just staring. One consultant later described the sight as profoundly unsettling, not because of anything the man did, because he appeared to be waiting, as though he already knew they would look. The figure remained visible for approximately 30 seconds. Then the lights flickered. Power failed momentarily. When illumination returned, the man was gone. Security officers searched the courtyard immediately. Nothing. No footprints. No witnesses. No signs of entry. No signs of departure. No explanation. The official report should have ended there. Instead, it became much stranger, because all 8 witnesses independently described the man's appearance. Male, approximately 30 years old. Dark coat, dark hair, facial scar above the left eyebrow. Weeks later, investigators discovered a sketch attached to one of the later Archive 17 files. The sketch depicted Daniel Mercer. The resemblance was nearly perfect. Nobody knew how that was possible. Mercer supposedly did not exist. Mercer supposedly had not yet been born. Yet, witnesses appeared to have seen him standing outside Broadcasting House in 1975, watching the investigation unfold, watching people listen to his recording, as though he somehow knew exactly where it would end up. That incident should have triggered public attention. It didn't. The BBC buried everything. Files disappeared. Reports vanished. Transcripts were restricted. Anyone requesting information encountered immediate resistance. And for a while, the strategy worked. Archive 17 slowly faded into obscurity until another event changed everything, because 3 weeks after the window incident, the recording began speaking directly to people who were listening. And that was when the real fear started. To be continued. File 17. The first documented case occurred on March 11th, 1975. The listener was not an engineer, not an archivist, not a producer. He was a security officer assigned to monitor access to the restricted storage room containing Archive 17. His name appears only once in the surviving records. Most references identify him simply as Officer B. According to witness statements, Officer B had never listened to the recording. He had never read the transcripts. He had never participated in the investigation. His only responsibility was guarding the archive room. That fact would later become extremely important, because whatever happened to him could not be blamed on suggestion. At 8:17 p.m., Officer B contacted building security. The call lasted approximately 30 seconds. The recording of that call no longer exists. Only a transcript survives. The conversation was brief. Operator, security desk. Officer B, there's someone down here. Operator, who? Officer B, I don't know. Operator, employee? Officer B, no. Operator, can you identify them? A pause follows. Then the final response. The last words ever officially attributed to Officer B. No. Another pause. Then, he's looking at me. The line disconnected immediately afterward. Security personnel reached the archive level less than 2 minutes later. Officer B was gone. His chair remained positioned in front of the door. His radio sat on the desk. A cup of tea remained half-finished beside an incident log. There was no evidence of a struggle, no signs of forced entry, no indication he had left voluntarily, nothing. Officer B was never found. The disappearance was quietly attributed to personal circumstances. The case closed, the files sealed, and Archive 17 remained hidden, at least publicly. Privately, panic was beginning to spread because this was no longer a story about strange predictions. People connected to the investigation were disappearing. Richard Mallory, now Officer B. The committee could no longer dismiss the pattern. A confidential memorandum dated March 18th reveals the growing concern. The document contains a recommendation that all future reviews of Archive 17 occur in groups of no fewer than 3 individuals. Nobody was permitted to listen alone. Nobody was permitted to access the storage room alone. Nobody was permitted to remove copies from the building. The restrictions seem excessive until you read the reason. Handwritten across the bottom of the memo are 7 words. Subject may demonstrate awareness of observers. Subject not recording. Not tape. Subject, as though investigators had stopped thinking of Daniel Mercer as a voice and started thinking of him as something else. Something capable of observing them in return. The idea sounds ridiculous. It should sound ridiculous. Yet, the surviving files repeatedly suggest the same conclusion. Several listeners reported the unsettling sensation that Mercer somehow knew they were there. Not in a metaphorical sense. Literally, one engineer described feeling as though the recording were responding to his thoughts. Another insisted certain portions changed between listening sessions. The committee dismissed these claims. At first, then came the comparison tests. In April of 1975, 3 separate transcripts were created from independent copies of Archive 17. The purpose was simple: verify consistency, ensure no transcription errors existed. Instead, investigators discovered discrepancies, minor ones, but real. Words appeared in one version and not another. Entire sentences differed. One transcript contained a reference to a flood. Another did not. One mentioned a date. The others omitted it completely. At first, the committee blamed human error. Then, they compared the original audio. The discrepancies remained. According to internal notes, playback produced slightly different results depending on when it occurred. The differences were subtle, easy to miss, yet impossible to explain. A senior engineer eventually wrote, "Recording demonstrates non-static informational structure." Another added beneath it, "I don't even know what that means." Neither did anyone else. Months passed. The investigation expanded. Then, on June 4th, everything changed. Because that was the day investigators identified the first verifiable prediction that should have been impossible. The event involved a small village in northern England. Nothing significant, nothing famous. A place most people had never heard of. Months before the incident occurred, Archive 17 described it in detail. Not vaguely, not symbolically. Precisely. A bridge collapse. 3 injuries. 1 fatality. The exact date. The exact weather conditions. Even the approximate time. When investigators compared the prediction to newspaper reports after the collapse occurred, the match was nearly perfect. One reviewer initially believed the documents had been altered afterward, a reasonable assumption, until carbon dating confirmed the notes had been written months earlier. The prediction existed before the event, far before. That discovery shattered what remained of the committee's confidence. Some members resigned. Others requested reassignment. A few became obsessed. One in particular, a researcher named Helen Cartwright. Helen appears throughout the surviving files. Brilliant, methodical, respected. Unlike most investigators, she did not fear Archive 17. She believed it represented a scientific breakthrough, a discovery, an opportunity. While others searched for reasons to shut the project down, Helen wanted deeper access, more recordings, more analysis, more data. She became convinced the tape was not a hoax, not a supernatural phenomenon, but evidence of something extraordinary, and she intended to prove it. Unfortunately, Helen made a mistake that would cost her everything. According to her personal notes, she began listening to the recording repeatedly, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, reviewing sections, comparing transcripts, searching for patterns. Initially, her observations appeared useful. Then, they became increasingly disturbing. One journal entry reads, "I knew what the next sentence would be before it played." Another, "I recognized a location I have never visited." And another, "I believe Mercer is trying to communicate something hidden between the spoken sections." The entries continue for months, each one more alarming than the last. Then, in September, a dramatic shift occurs. Helen stops writing about the recording. She starts writing about someone watching her. The description appears repeatedly. Dark coat, dark hair, scar above the left eyebrow. The same figure seen outside broadcasting house. The same figure connected to multiple witness reports. The same face associated with Daniel Mercer. At first, she saw him in crowds, then on train platforms, then outside her apartment. Always distant, always watching, never approaching, never speaking. Several colleagues assumed stress was affecting her judgment. They encouraged time off, rest, distance from the project. Helen refused. Instead, she became increasingly convinced that the sightings were real. Then, on October 3rd, 1975, she submitted a sealed statement to the committee. The statement survives. Partially. The final page is missing. Yet, the remaining sections contain one sentence. Investigators would never forget. I don't think Daniel Mercer is sending messages into the past. The next line follows immediately. I think he's trying to stop something from coming through. And according to every surviving record, that was the last statement Helen Cartwright ever made. Because 24 hours later, she disappeared without a trace. To be continued. Helen Cartwright disappeared on the morning of October 4th, 1975. At least, that is what the official files say. The unofficial files tell a different story. According to the investigation committee, Helen never arrived home the night before. Her apartment remained untouched. Her car was discovered in the parking area outside Broadcasting House. Her handbag remained on the passenger seat. Her keys were found inside the vehicle. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of abduction, no indication that she had planned to leave. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Richard Mallory, Officer B, Helen Cartwright. 3 people connected directly to Archive 17. 3 disappearances, 3 investigations producing nothing. And yet, despite everything, the committee refused to shut the project down. Because by then, they had become convinced of something even more disturbing. The recording was changing. Not metaphorically, not through interpretation. Actually changing. One memorandum describes an experiment performed in late October. Investigators created multiple copies of the tape and stored them separately. The goal was simple. Determine whether the contents remained identical over time. The answer should have been obvious. A recording is a recording. The information should remain fixed. Instead, several weeks later, minor differences appeared. New words, missing phrases, altered pauses. The changes were small, but they were real. One reviewer compared the phenomenon to watching a book slowly rewrite itself. Nobody could explain it. Nobody could even agree it was happening. Yet every time fresh transcripts were produced, additional discrepancies emerged. The situation became so concerning that a recommendation was issued. No future transcript was to be considered definitive. Every version would be archived separately. Every variation would be preserved. The committee feared they were losing information, or perhaps gaining it. Nobody knew which possibility was worse. Then came the recording's most famous section, a portion known internally as the warning. The transcript appears in nearly every surviving file. The pages are heavily worn, repeatedly photocopied, studied countless times. Somebody had clearly considered it important. The passage begins with Daniel Mercer speaking more quickly than before. For the first time in the recording, he sounds frightened, genuinely frightened. The transcript reads, "If you're hearing this, then they're already searching." A pause. They search through memory first. Another pause. That's why nobody notices the missing people. You cannot miss what you no longer remember. The next section contains several seconds of static. Then, if someone disappears, write their name down. Do not trust your memory. Do not trust photographs. Do not trust records. Write it down. Several committee members highlighted this passage repeatedly. At first glance, it sounded absurd. Then, a strange pattern emerged. Investigators began noticing inconsistencies in older files. Names vanished from reports. References disappeared from meeting notes. Entire pages appeared to describe conversations involving people who could no longer be identified. One example became particularly famous among those involved in the project. A meeting held in November 1975. Every surviving record confirms 8 individuals attended, yet only 7 names appear on the attendance sheet. The missing name was never recovered. More troubling still, nobody remembered who the 8th person was. The discrepancy should have been obvious. Instead, it went unnoticed for months. When investigators finally discovered it, panic spread through the committee. Because Daniel Mercer had described exactly this phenomenon on the recording. People disappearing, memories changing, evidence eroding afterward. The resemblance was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. Then something happened that transformed the investigation forever. A new voice appeared on the tape. The discovery occurred in December. Multiple listeners independently reported hearing a second speaker near the end of the recording. Initially, the committee assumed they were mistaken. Audio analysis revealed no additional voice, no hidden track, no background conversation, nothing. Yet, the reports continued. More listeners, more descriptions, and, remarkably, they all described hearing different messages. One engineer heard his own name. A producer heard the date of his daughter's birth. An archivist heard an address where he had lived as a child. The details were always personal, always specific, and never relevant to anyone else. The committee attempted controlled testing. The results only deepened the mystery. Individuals placed in separate rooms reported hearing entirely different content during the same section of the tape. No known technology could produce such an effect. The findings were classified immediately. For the first time, investigators began discussing the possibility that Archive 17 represented something beyond conventional explanation. The language of the reports changed. Words like anomaly, phenomenon, exposure event, containment, terms more commonly associated with dangerous materials than audio recordings. By early 1976, access restrictions had become extreme. The tape remained locked behind multiple security barriers. Only authorized personnel could review it. Every listening session required written approval. Every participant underwent psychological evaluation. The BBC was no longer studying a strange recording. The BBC was attempting to contain it, and according to one internal memo, they were failing. The same memo contains a sentence that still unsettles researchers today. The recording appears increasingly aware of observation. Nobody explained what that meant. Nobody elaborated. The statement simply appears in the file and never reappears, as though even writing it down made investigators uncomfortable. Around this time, another development emerged, perhaps the most alarming discovery of all. Daniel Mercer began discussing specific individuals involved in the investigation, not generally, specifically. Names, dates, private details, information that should have been impossible for him to know. One transcript records the moment clearly. The voice says, "Richard was the first." A pause. "Helen shouldn't have continued listening." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Arthur, if you're hearing this, leave the archive." The significance of that sentence would not be understood until years later, because Arthur Bennett, the archivist who eventually showed me the files, would not hear the recording until 1989, 14 years after those words had supposedly been recorded. Yet, when he finally listened, the warning was there, waiting for him, exactly as described. When Arthur told me that story, I assumed memory distortion until he showed me something I could not explain. An archived transcript created in 1976. The warning appeared on the page, typed decades before Arthur ever heard it, decades before anyone knew he would be involved. I spent nearly an hour staring at that document, searching for a flaw, a forgery, an inconsistency. I found none. The implication was impossible. Yet every piece of evidence pointed toward the same conclusion. The recording somehow knew who would listen to it in the future. And if that was true, then perhaps Daniel Mercer wasn't speaking into the past at all. Perhaps he was speaking across something else entirely, something far more dangerous. I was still trying to process that possibility when Arthur called me again. It was nearly midnight. His voice was trembling. Worse than before. Much worse. "Edward," he said. I listened to part of the tape. For several seconds I said nothing. Then, "You promised you wouldn't." "I know." "What happened?" Silence. Heavy breathing. Then a response. Not immediate. Not confident. The voice of a man struggling to accept what he had heard. "It mentioned you." Every muscle in my body tightened. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then Arthur whispered the words that would change everything. "It knew you were investigating." For several seconds I couldn't speak. The sound of Arthur's breathing filled the line. Uneven, shallow. The breathing of a man who had seen something he wished he hadn't. Finally, I forced myself to answer. "What exactly did it say?" Arthur hesitated. Not because he couldn't remember, because he remembered perfectly. I didn't play the entire recording, just a section, a few minutes. Then I heard it. Another pause. The voice changed. My stomach tightened. Changed how? It stopped talking about the drift. It stopped talking about the stations. It stopped talking about the future. His voice dropped lower. It started talking about you. Outside my apartment, rain struck the windows. A steady rhythm, cold, persistent. For some reason I became intensely aware of it, as though every sound suddenly mattered. "What did it say?" I repeated. Arthur inhaled slowly, then recited the words exactly. "Edward Harrow will find this file in November." Silence. "He won't believe it at first." Another pause. "He should stop before reaching the final recording." For a moment, I simply stared into the darkness beyond my window. My rational mind immediately supplied explanations. Forgery, manipulation, Arthur lying, Arthur misremembering. Yet none of those explanations felt convincing. Not anymore. Not after everything I had seen. Not after the documents. Not after the disappearances. And certainly not after what Arthur said next. "The transcript exists." "What transcript?" "The one containing your name." I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest. "What are you talking about?" "I found it tonight." His voice shook. "It was filed in 1976. I didn't answer because there was nothing to say. If what Arthur claimed was true, Then someone had typed my name into an archived document decades before I was born. Impossible, absurd, yet increasingly difficult to dismiss. Arthur eventually broke the silence. "Edward." "Yes?" "I think you need to hear the tape." I closed my eyes. Every instinct told me no. Every warning in the files told me no. Richard disappeared. Helen disappeared. Others vanished. The investigation had left a trail of ruined lives behind it. Listening would be reckless, dangerous, possibly irrational. Yet I already knew I would do it, because curiosity is a difficult thing to overcome, and because deep down I needed answers. 3 days later, Arthur arrived at my apartment, carrying the duplicate cassette, the same yellowed tape he had shown me in the pub, the same tape connected to 40 years of unanswered questions. The weather outside matched the descriptions found throughout the files. Rain, fog, low clouds. The city seemed strangely muted, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Arthur placed the cassette on my kitchen table. Neither of us touched it immediately. We simply stared at it. An ordinary object, cheap plastic, a handwritten label. Nothing remarkable, nothing frightening. Yet, every document we had examined suggested otherwise. Eventually, Arthur spoke. "Last chance." I laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because I understood exactly what he meant. Neither of us truly expected the tape to contain anything impossible. Not really. Part of us still believed there would be a rational explanation. There had to be. The alternative was unacceptable. I inserted the cassette into an old player, pressed play. Static filled the room, soft, consistent. The hiss of aging magnetic tape. Then a voice emerged. Calm, measured, familiar from the transcripts. Daniel Mercer. Hearing him for the first time felt strangely unsettling, not because of what he said, because of how normal he sounded. No dramatic tone, no sinister delivery, no hint of madness. Just a tired man speaking into a microphone. If you're hearing this, then the breach is larger than we feared. The recording continued. I listened carefully, comparing the spoken words to the transcripts. Everything matched. The drift, the disappearances, the monitoring stations, the warnings. For nearly 40 minutes, nothing unusual happened. Then Daniel said something I had never seen in any transcript. I immediately paused the tape. Arthur looked at me. "You heard it too?" I nodded slowly, because I had. The words had been brief, almost casual, easy to miss, yet unmistakable. Daniel had said, "There should be 2 of you." Neither of us spoke. The sentence was not present in any surviving document. Neither Arthur nor I had ever encountered it before. I rewound the tape, played the section again. The words remained exactly the same. "There should be two of you." Arthur looked pale. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer, because I had no answer. We continued listening. The recording advanced, minute after minute. Then Daniel's tone changed. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, the tired resignation vanished. For the first time, genuine urgency entered his voice. The transcript of this section had been heavily damaged. Now I understood why. The message was unlike anything earlier in the recording. "You're running out of time." A pause. "The corrections are accelerating." Another pause. "If you're hearing this version, then the first containment failure already happened." The first containment failure. The phrase appeared nowhere else. Arthur scribbled notes furiously. I kept listening. Then Daniel said something that made my blood run cold. "Don't trust the photographs." My eyes immediately moved toward a framed picture standing on a shelf across the room. An old family photograph. My parents, my sister, and me. For some reason, I couldn't stop looking at it. The recording continued. "Photographs change last." The words echoed through the room. Then, "Memory changes first. Records change second. Photographs change last." Arthur slowly lowered his pen. Neither of us spoke. The atmosphere inside the apartment had changed. The feeling was difficult to describe. Not fear, not exactly. More like the growing certainty that something was wrong, very wrong. Then the tape reached the section. The section described repeatedly throughout the files. The part where listeners claimed to hear personal messages. I expected nothing, absolutely nothing. The phenomenon sounded impossible, the result of suggestion, psychological contamination, mass expectation. The voice continued. Static crackled. The tape hiss deepened. Then Daniel stopped speaking. Several seconds passed. Silence. I exchanged a glance with Arthur. Nothing happened. I almost laughed. Then a new voice appeared. Not Daniel's. Not distorted. Not hidden. Clear. Close. Whispering directly into my headphones. And it spoke my name. Edward. My entire body froze. The voice sounded familiar, painfully familiar. For one horrifying second, I couldn't identify it. Then realization hit me. The voice belonged to my father. My father had been dead for 12 years. I ripped the headphones off instantly. The room spun. Arthur stared at me. What happened? I couldn't answer, not immediately, because across the room, the family photograph had fallen face down onto the floor. Neither of us had touched it. Neither of us had moved. For several seconds, we sat in silence. Then Arthur slowly stood, walked toward the shelf, picked up the photograph, and went completely white. I rose from my chair. "What is it?" Arthur turned the frame toward me. My heart stopped. The photograph still showed my parents. It still showed me. But my sister was gone. Not blurred, not damaged. Gone, as though she had never been there at all. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Arthur continued holding the photograph with both hands, staring at it, as though refusing to believe what he was seeing. I took the frame from him, looked closer. The image was old, nearly 20 years old. A family holiday. One of the few photographs my parents always kept displayed. I knew every detail, the clothes, the background, the expressions. Most importantly, I knew my sister had been standing beside me. Yet now there was only empty space. Not damage, not distortion, not fading. Empty space, as though she had never existed. I immediately grabbed my phone, opened the photo gallery, searched for other copies. Dozens of images appeared. Every single one showed the same thing. My parents, myself, nobody else. I felt a cold sensation spread through my body. Arthur watched in silence. Finally, he spoke. "What's her name?" The question should have been simple. The answer should have come instantly. Instead, I froze. My mouth opened. No words emerged. I knew I had a sister. I knew it absolutely. Yet, for several horrifying seconds, I could not remember her name. Not even the first letter. The realization hit me harder than anything I had experienced since this investigation began, because Daniel Mercer had warned us. Memory changes first. Records change second. Photographs change last. I suddenly understood why investigators had become obsessed with writing things down, why they distrusted memory, why they documented everything. The changes weren't happening around them. The changes were happening to them. And now they were happening to me. Eventually the name returned, like something surfacing from deep water. Emily. My sister's name was Emily. The moment I remembered it, I wrote it down. Immediately. A notebook, a scrap of paper, my phone, every surface available. Emily Harrow. Emily Harrow. Emily Harrow. Arthur nodded, as though he had expected exactly this reaction. Then he quietly asked, "Can you call her?" I already knew the answer. My sister had died 6 years earlier. Cancer. The memory remained clear, painfully clear. Yet, after everything that had happened, certainty felt dangerous. I searched my contacts. Nothing. No Emily. No record. I checked old emails. Nothing. Social media. Nothing. The deeper I searched, the worse the feeling became, because every piece of evidence seemed to suggest the same impossible conclusion. My sister had never existed, yet I remembered her. I remembered birthdays, conversations, arguments, funeral flowers, memories too detailed to be imaginary. And suddenly I understood Michael Turner, the engineer who remembered attending a funeral that hadn't happened yet. The reports no longer seemed absurd. They seemed terrifyingly plausible. Arthur finally broke the silence. "We need to know what happened to the committee." I looked up. "What do you mean?" If Mercer was right. He hesitated. If he was right, then maybe the missing investigators weren't taken. A pause. Then, maybe they were erased. The idea should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, it felt disturbingly reasonable. That realization frightened me more than anything else, because once an impossible explanation starts making sense, something has already gone very wrong. The following morning, we returned to the recovered files, specifically the documents relating to the final phase of the investigation. Most were damaged, incomplete, scattered. Yet a pattern quickly emerged. The committee had become increasingly focused on something called Station Zero. The term appeared dozens of times, sometimes underlined, sometimes accompanied by warning labels, occasionally blacked out entirely. Yet enough references remained to reconstruct a rough picture. According to Daniel Mercer, 7 monitoring stations originally existed. Their purpose was unclear. Their locations remained unknown. But Station Zero was different, special. The first station, the oldest station, and apparently the most important. One fragment from the recording read, "If Station Zero fails, correction becomes impossible." Another, "Everything depends on keeping the door closed." The door. Again. The same word appeared throughout the investigation. The same word described repeatedly in witness dreams. The corridor, the number 17, the door. None of it made sense. Until Arthur discovered a map hidden among the archive materials. The map changed everything. At first glance, it appeared ordinary. A survey map of northern England. Nothing unusual, until we noticed the markings. 7 red circles spread across the country, connected by thin lines, and at the center, a location highlighted repeatedly in black ink. A location labeled Station Zero. Neither of us recognized the place. The site wasn't marked by name, only coordinates. Coordinates corresponding to an isolated stretch of moorland in North Yorkshire, several miles from the nearest village, almost completely inaccessible. Arthur compared the map with committee notes. The match was undeniable. This was the location. The place investigators had become obsessed with during the final months before the project disappeared. The place they believed Daniel Mercer was describing. And according to one surviving memorandum, the place where Helen Cartwright had gone shortly before she vanished. I stared at the coordinates. A terrible feeling settled over me, because deep down, I already knew what would happen next. We were going there. We had no choice. Every clue pointed toward the moor. Every surviving file pointed toward Station Zero. And if answers existed anywhere, they existed there. 3 days later, we began the journey. The drive north took nearly 6 hours. Rain followed us most of the way. Low clouds rolled across the landscape. Visibility worsened with every passing mile. By evening, we reached the nearest village, a small collection of stone buildings surrounded by endless countryside, the kind of place where strangers are noticed immediately. We rented rooms above a pub. The owner was elderly, friendly, talkative, at least until Arthur mentioned the coordinates. The reaction was immediate. The old man's smile vanished. His expression hardened. "You don't want to go there." Arthur exchanged a glance with me. "Why?" The man hesitated, then shook his head. "People get lost." I almost laughed. It sounded exactly like the sort of local superstition every rural community possesses. The old man noticed. His expression darkened further. "I'm serious." Another pause. "Then they go up there, and they don't come back the same." The wording caught my attention. Not "they don't come back." They don't come back the same. Arthur noticed it too. "What does that mean?" The old man stared into his glass. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he quietly answered. "Sometimes they forget people." The room suddenly felt colder. The old man continued. "My grandfather used to talk about it. He called it the empty place. He said people would come back missing memories." The word struck me like a physical blow. Missing memories. Exactly what Daniel Mercer had described. Exactly what the investigators had documented. Exactly what had happened to me. The old man finally looked up, and for the first time since entering the pub, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Whatever you're looking for." He paused. "Don't stay after dark." The next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky remained gray. Heavy clouds stretched across the moorland like a ceiling of stone. Everything felt strangely silent. No birds, no distant traffic, no wind. just an unnatural stillness that seemed to absorb sound rather than carry it. Arthur noticed it too. Neither of us mentioned it. Some things become more unsettling when spoken aloud. We left the village shortly after sunrise. The coordinates led us north across a narrow country road before disappearing onto an old track barely visible beneath overgrown grass. The further we traveled, the older the landscape appeared. Stone walls, collapsed farm buildings, abandoned paths, signs of human presence slowly fading back into the earth. Eventually, even the track vanished. We continued on foot. According to the map, Station 0 lay less than 2 miles ahead. The walk should have taken under an hour. Instead, it took nearly 3, because something was wrong with the terrain. At first, the inconsistencies seemed minor. A hill appearing larger than before, a stone wall appearing where no wall had existed moments earlier, a footpath changing direction. Each detail was easy to dismiss individually. Together, they formed a pattern. The landscape itself felt unstable, as though it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Around midday, Arthur stopped walking. I turned. He was staring toward a distant ridge. "What is it?" Arthur pointed. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed movement. A figure, far away, standing motionless against the gray horizon, too distant to identify, yet somehow familiar, even from hundreds of yards away. I already knew who it resembled. The same man seen outside Broadcasting House, the same face described by investigators, the same scar, the same silhouette. Daniel Mercer, or someone who looked exactly like him. The figure remained visible for perhaps 5 seconds. Then fog rolled across the ridge. When visibility returned, it was gone. Neither Arthur nor I spoke. We simply continued walking because neither of us wanted to discuss what we had seen, and because deep down we were both beginning to understand something terrible. The sightings weren't random. They never had been. Someone or something wanted witnesses. The first sign of Station 0 appeared shortly afterward. A fence, rusting, half collapsed, almost completely hidden beneath vegetation. Behind it stood a structure, small, concrete, windowless, weathered by decades of exposure. At first glance, it resembled an abandoned military installation. Nothing remarkable, nothing supernatural. Yet as we approached, a strange sensation settled over me. Recognition. The building felt familiar, not because I had visited it before, because I had dreamed about it. The realization stopped me cold. Arthur looked at me. "You too?" I nodded. Neither of us needed to explain. The corridor, the door, the number 17. Every listener had reported the same dream. And now we were standing in front of the place from those dreams. The entrance door remained intact. Faded paint covered its surface. Most of the lettering had disappeared. Only a single number remained visible. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Arthur quietly said, "It was real." I wasn't sure what frightened me more, the possibility that the dream had come from the recording, or the possibility that the recording had come from this place. The door opened with surprising ease. The interior beyond was dark, cold, silent. A narrow corridor extended into the earth, exactly as described in dozens of witness statements, exactly as described in hundreds of pages of investigation notes, exactly as described in dreams experienced by people separated by decades. The similarity was perfect. No deviation, no inconsistency. Every detail matched. I switched on a flashlight. The beam revealed concrete walls stained by age. Dust covered every surface. No footprints. No recent activity. Nothing to suggest anyone had entered for years. Yet, the feeling of being watched returned immediately. Stronger than before. Almost overwhelming. The corridor stretched forward for perhaps 50 yards. At the far end stood another door. Metal. Gray. Featureless. Except for a faded designation plate. Station 0. Arthur exhaled slowly. Neither of us had expected confirmation to arrive so easily. Part of me still hoped the location would prove unrelated. A coincidence. A dead end. Instead, it matched the files perfectly. Every step deeper into the facility made denial more difficult. We reached the final door. It was locked, at least initially. Then Arthur noticed something. A key still inserted into the mechanism. The metal looked ancient, corroded, untouched for decades. For several seconds we simply stared. The implication was obvious. Someone had locked this door from the outside and never returned. I felt a chill crawl through my body. Then Arthur turned the key. The lock opened instantly. The room beyond was enormous, far larger than the building should have allowed. The discrepancy was immediate, impossible. The exterior structure measured perhaps 40 feet across. The chamber beyond seemed hundreds of feet wide. A vast circular space descending into darkness. Rows of machinery lined the walls. Most had long since failed. Rust-consumed metal surfaces, cables hung from ceilings. Dust covered everything, yet, despite the decay, one machine remained active. A single light glowed in the darkness. Faint, steady, waiting. Neither of us spoke. We simply stared, because the machine should not have been functioning. Not after decades of abandonment. Not without power, not without maintenance. And yet, it remained alive. Arthur slowly approached. I followed. As we drew closer, details emerged. The machine resembled an enormous recording device. Reels, magnetic components, monitoring equipment. Technology unlike anything I had ever seen. Some parts appeared decades old. Others seemed strangely modern, as though multiple generations of engineering had been merged together. Then I noticed something sitting beside the machine. A tape recorder, portable, dust-covered, waiting. The sight immediately triggered a memory, a line from the recording. If this reaches the past, I felt my pulse quicken, because suddenly I understood, at least partially. Daniel Mercer had not found the recording. He had made it. Here, inside Station Zero, the realization struck Arthur at the same moment. I could see it in his face. Neither of us wanted to say the words aloud, because doing so would make everything far too real. Then we heard a sound, a voice, faint, distant, echoing somewhere within the darkness beyond the machine. At first, I assumed imagination. Then it came again, a single sentence, barely audible, yet unmistakable. "You're too early." Arthur froze. So did I. The voice had not come from the recorder. It had come from somewhere deeper inside the chamber, somewhere below us, waiting in the darkness. And then, for the first time since entering Station Zero, another light switched on. The second light appeared somewhere far below us, a small white glow, weak at first, then stronger, slowly illuminating sections of the chamber that had remained hidden until now. What emerged from the darkness made my blood run cold. The room extended far deeper than either of us had imagined. Levels, platforms, walkways, entire sections descending beneath the earth like an underground city. The architecture felt wrong, not because it was alien, because it seemed familiar in ways I couldn't explain. Every angle, every corridor, every stairway, I had seen them before, in dreams. The same dreams reported by dozens of BBC investigators. The same dreams documented for decades. Arthur whispered the thought both of us were having. This place is causing it. Before I could answer, the voice returned. Closer this time, clearer. Not the place. The sound echoed through the chamber, male, calm, measured, the exact tone we had heard on the recording. Daniel Mercer. Arthur spun toward the darkness. "Who's there?" Silence followed. Then footsteps, slow, unhurried, approaching from below. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. A figure emerged from the shadows. Dark coat, dark hair, a thin scar above the left eyebrow. Exactly as described in dozens of witness statements stretching back half a century. For several seconds, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. The man looked approximately 30 years old, not 70, not 80. 30, the same age witnesses described in 1975, the same age reported in 1989, the same age reported in 2018. Unchanged, impossible. The figure stopped several yards away. His expression remained calm, almost tired, as though he had repeated the same conversation countless times before. Then he spoke. "My name is Daniel Mercer." Hearing those words in person felt far more disturbing than hearing them on tape, because now there was no distance, no recording, no static, just a living human being standing in front of us, or something that appeared human. Arthur finally found his voice. "That's impossible." Daniel nodded. "Yes." The answer surprised me. No denial, no argument, no attempt to explain, just agreement, as though impossibility no longer mattered. I stepped forward. "You made the recording." Daniel looked at me. "I made many recordings." A chill ran through me. Many recordings, not one, many. Why? Daniel glanced toward the machine. For the first time, genuine sadness appeared in his expression. Because every version ends differently. The words settled heavily in the silence. Every version. I already knew what he meant, or thought I did. Different timelines, different histories, different outcomes. The drift, the thing he had spent decades trying to warn people about. Arthur spoke next. "What is the drift?" Daniel remained silent for several seconds, searching for an answer. Finally, he said, "Imagine reality as a story." He gestured toward the darkness surrounding us. Every second of every day, the story rewrites itself. Most changes are small, unnoticed, corrected. Then his expression hardened. But sometimes the corrections fail. The room suddenly felt colder. Daniel continued. When that happens, entire pieces of the story disappear. People, places, memories, histories. The explanation matched the recording perfectly, yet hearing it here felt different, more real, more dangerous. I thought about Emily, my sister, or the sister I remembered. The sister reality no longer seemed willing to acknowledge. Daniel noticed my expression immediately. "You remember someone." It wasn't a question. I nodded. Daniel looked away, as though he had heard the answer too many times before. "Then it has already started." The words hit harder than I expected. Arthur stepped forward. "What happened to the investigators?" For the first time, Daniel hesitated. The silence lasted several seconds. Then they got too close. The answer was not reassuring. What does that mean? Daniel looked directly at us. It noticed them. Neither of us spoke, because deep down we already knew what he meant. The drift was not merely a process, not merely a phenomenon. The files had hinted at something worse, something intelligent, something aware. Daniel confirmed it. The corrections became deliberate. The words echoed through the chamber. Deliberate, not accidental, not random. Deliberate. I suddenly understood why the committee had started using terms like containment, why they spoke of awareness, why they treated the recording like a dangerous object. They believed something was watching, and according to Daniel, they were right. A low vibration rolled through the chamber. The machine beside us emitted a deep mechanical hum. Daniel immediately turned toward it. For the first time, fear appeared on his face. Real fear, not concern, not caution, fear. That's earlier than usual. Arthur frowned. What is? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared toward the darkness above us, listening. Then he quietly said, "It found us." The lights throughout the chamber flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. The vibration intensified. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Somewhere deep within the facility, metal groaned. A terrible sound, like something enormous shifting in its sleep. Daniel moved toward the machine. Fast. Urgent. This is why I made the recordings. His voice had changed. No longer calm, no longer measured. Desperate. You need to leave. Arthur shook his head. No. Daniel stopped, looked directly at him, then said something that froze both of us where we stood. Helen didn't leave either. Silence. Absolute silence. Arthur stared. So she's dead? Daniel's expression darkened. No. The answer somehow felt worse. The vibration grew stronger. Around us, lights began activating throughout the station, one after another. Rows of them, hundreds. The chamber slowly illuminated, and what the light revealed nearly stopped my heart. People. Not living people. Not exactly. Figures. Hundreds of them, standing motionless on distant platforms throughout the station, watching, waiting. Every age, every decade, every style of clothing. Some looked modern. Others appeared decades old. Many matched photographs from the investigation files. Richard Mallory, Helen Cartwright, Officer B, and countless others. The missing, the forgotten, the erased. All standing silently in the light. Arthur took a step backward. His face had gone completely white. What are they? Daniel answered without looking away from the crowd. They were never fully corrected. The words barely registered, because another realization struck me. The figures were watching us, every one of them, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Then, somewhere among them, a woman stepped forward. My breath caught instantly. I knew her face. I knew it with absolute certainty. Emily, my sister. She was standing among the others, looking directly at me. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The station, the machine, the noise, the fear. Nothing mattered. Only Emily. I started toward her. Daniel grabbed my arm. Hard. Don't! His voice was sharp, urgent. That's not her. I looked at him, then back toward the figure. Emily remained perfectly still, smiling. The same smile I remembered. The same smile from photographs that no longer existed. And suddenly, I understood. Daniel wasn't afraid of the missing people. He was afraid of what was wearing their faces. For one terrible moment, I almost ignored him. I almost pulled away, almost ran towards the figure standing among the crowd, because every instinct in my body told me it was Emily, not something resembling her, not a memory, not a trick. Emily, the sister I remembered, the sister reality had erased, the sister I had mourned, the sister whose photographs no longer existed. Daniel tightened his grip on my arm. Look at her eyes. I did, and immediately wished I hadn't. At first, they seemed normal. Then the figure smiled wider, far wider than any human face should allow. The expression never reached the eyes, because there was nothing behind them. No recognition, no warmth, no humanity, only emptiness. The illusion shattered instantly. The thing wearing Emily's face took another step forward, then another. Across the chamber, the remaining figures began moving too, slowly, silently. Hundreds of them. The missing, the forgotten, the erased, all advancing at once. Arthur whispered something under his breath, a prayer, a curse. I couldn't tell which. Daniel released my arm and turned toward the machine. Listen carefully. The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. You need to leave now. What about you? I asked. Daniel gave a tired smile, the smile of someone who had already accepted the outcome. I never leave. The answer struck me harder than I expected, because suddenly I understood. Daniel Mercer had not been warning people for years. He had been warning them for decades, perhaps longer. Trapped inside Station Zero, recording messages, sending them backward, trying again and again and again, every version ending differently, every attempt failing. The machine beside him began to glow. Its reels accelerated. Lights flashed across ancient control panels. The entire station vibrated violently. The advancing figures continued moving. Closer now, much closer. I could see faces clearly. Richard Mallory, Helen Cartwright, Officer B, dozens of names from the files, hundreds of others whose identities had been lost or erased. Daniel pointed toward a staircase leading upward. Go! Arthur didn't move. Neither did I. Daniel's expression hardened. If you stay, it learns you. The sentence hit me like a physical blow, because suddenly everything made sense. The disappearances, the memory loss, the missing records, the forgotten names. The thing behind the drift wasn't simply removing people. It was consuming them, learning them, replacing them. The station shook again, this time violently. Concrete cracked overhead. Dust poured from the ceiling. The figures began accelerating, no longer walking, approaching, hungry. Daniel turned back toward the machine. I can still close this version. Version, not breach, not station. Version. The word suddenly carried terrifying implications. How many times had this happened? How many realities had already failed? How many recordings had been sent backward through time? I never received an answer, because at that moment, every light in Station Zero exploded simultaneously. Darkness swallowed the chamber, absolute darkness. Then came the sound, a voice, not Daniel's, not human, not even language, something deeper, older, a noise that felt wrong the moment it entered the mind. The closest comparison would be thousands of voices speaking simultaneously. Every age, every emotion, every memory merged into something vast and impossible. Arthur collapsed to his knees. Blood streamed from his nose. I nearly followed. The sound wasn't merely heard. It was experienced, felt, remembered, as though some part of the brain recognized it from long before birth. Then another voice cut through the chaos. Daniel, shouting. The first time I had heard genuine panic in his voice. Run! I didn't hesitate. Neither did Arthur. We ran. Up the staircase, through the corridor, past the numbered door. The vibration intensified behind us. The station felt alive, awake. Something enormous moved beneath the earth, something trying to reach the surface. We burst through the entrance and stumbled onto the moorland. The sky above had turned almost black. Clouds rotated overhead in slow spirals. The air felt charged, unnatural. Then the ground shook. A deep rumble rolled beneath our feet. The sound lasted perhaps 10 seconds, perhaps 30. Time felt meaningless. Then silence returned instantly, completely. The vibration stopped. The wind stopped. Even the rain stopped. Everything became still. Behind us, Station Zero remained exactly where it had been. Quiet, abandoned, lifeless, as though nothing had happened. Arthur stared at the entrance. What did he do? I looked toward the dark doorway, toward the place Daniel Mercer remained trapped. And for the first time since beginning the investigation, I understood the purpose of the recordings. They were not warnings. Not really. They were messages in a bottle, thrown backward through time. One reality after another, a desperate attempt to delay something inevitable, to buy a little more time, a few more years, a few more chances, nothing more. We left the moor immediately. Neither of us spoke during the drive south. Neither of us slept that night, and neither of us ever returned to Station Zero. The official investigation ended there, at least for us. Arthur spent the following months organizing documents, cross-referencing files, preserving every surviving record. We agreed to publish nothing until the evidence could be verified. Then, 6 months later, Arthur Bennett disappeared. No note, no warning, no explanation. His apartment was untouched. His belongings remained exactly where they should have been. The police found nothing, just as they had found nothing for Richard Mallory, nothing for Helen Cartwright, nothing for Officer B. The pattern continued. I was alone again, the final keeper of the Archive 17 files. Or so I believed. Until 1 year later, because one evening, while reviewing the recovered documents, I discovered something I had somehow overlooked, a transcript, a page I had read dozens of times, yet somehow never noticed. At the bottom sat a final statement attributed to Daniel Mercer, a statement absent from every other copy, a statement apparently intended for a specific reader. For me, the sentence read, "If you're reading this, then Arthur is already gone." I stopped breathing. The document continued. "You'll think Station Zero is closed. It isn't. You'll think I stopped it. I didn't." My hands trembled. The next line nearly made me drop the page. "There is no first recording. There never was." Silence filled the room. I kept reading, and what came next was the most horrifying sentence in the entire archive, the final sentence ever attributed to Daniel Mercer, the final sentence preserved inside Archive 17, the sentence that still keeps me awake at night. It read, "The recording is not a warning. It is a memory." Officially, Archive 17 does not exist. The BBC denies any knowledge of the project. No public record references Daniel Mercer. No verified documents reference Station Zero. Most of the evidence remains missing or erased. Perhaps that is for the best, because after everything I discovered, one conclusion remains unavoidable. Daniel Mercer was telling the truth, not about everything, perhaps not even about most things, but about one thing. Memory cannot be trusted, records cannot be trusted. Reality itself may be far less stable than we believe. And if that is true, then somewhere, right now, someone may already be missing. Someone you once knew, someone you once loved, someone whose name is slowly disappearing from the world. And if you notice it happening, write the name down before it's gone. Archive reference: a 17-74-991. 5 seconds of silence. Unknown. Voice: you were not supposed to hear this part. End of recording.